I'm Lieutenant Commander Ava Mercer, 34 years old, and I joined the Navy at 22 because I wanted a life built on purpose, not promises. For years, I carried someone who didn't believe in either, my ex, Ryan Cole. I supported his dreams, paid his bills, defended his pride. But when he stood in a crowded bar and laughed that I made coffee for real soldiers, I realized I'd been loyal to the wrong person. Have you ever been mocked by someone who never understood your worth? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being disrespected, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about respect, resilience, and reclaiming your power. What happened next might surprise you. I joined the Navy at 22 because I wanted something bigger than myself. My father fixed cars in Norfolk, my mother worked night shifts at the hospital, and neither of them ever complained. They taught me discipline without ever saying the word. I grew up watching ships leave the harbor, massive gray hulls cutting through the water, and I thought, that's where I belong. Ryan Cole met me during my first year as an ensign at Pensacola Flight School. I was learning navigation systems, spending 14-hour days in classrooms and simulators, and he was one of the civilian mechanics who serviced our training aircraft. He had easy charm, the kind that made you forget you were tired. We'd grab coffee after my shifts, and he'd ask about my day with genuine interest. At least, it felt genuine then. "You're different," he told me once, leaning against his truck in the parking lot at 2200 hours. "Most people talk about what they want to do. You just do it." I should have paid attention to how he phrased that. Not admiration. Observation. Our relationship grew in the spaces between my training rotations. He'd drive 3 hours to see me when I had a weekend off. I'd call him from port during my first deployment, standing on deck with a calling card and a satellite phone, waves crashing below me in the dark. 6 months away felt longer when you had someone to miss. When I made lieutenant at 27, he took me to dinner and ordered champagne. He held my hand across the table and said he was proud of me. I believed him. I was running flight operations by then, coordinating aircraft maintenance schedules and mission logistics for a carrier air wing. The work was demanding, the kind that required you to make decisions while sleep-deprived and still get them right. Ryan started making jokes about my schedule. Small things at first. "Guess the Navy's more important than date night," he'd say when I had to cancel plans. I'd apologize, explain the demands, promise to make it up to him. He'd smile and say he understood, but his eyes never quite matched his mouth. I made lieutenant commander at 32. That's 04, field grade officer, and it's not common to get there that early. My commanding officer, Captain Hendricks, called me into his office and told me I'd been selected for a joint task group position under Commander Rowe. "You've earned this, Mercer," he said. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." I didn't know then why he felt the need to say that. Ryan's reaction was strange. He congratulated me, took me out to celebrate, but something had shifted. He started calling me Commander around his friends, but the way he said it made it sound like a joke. At a barbecue that summer, one of his buddies asked what I did, and Ryan answered before I could, "She tells people what to do. It's kind of her thing." Everyone laughed. I smiled because that's what you do. But I felt something crack inside my chest, small and quiet. I spent more time on base. It was easier there. Nobody questioned my authority or made jokes about my rank. When I briefed pilots on mission parameters, they listened. When I signed off on maintenance reports, the work got done. Competence was currency, and I'd earned mine. Ryan's business ventures started failing around the same time. He tried to start a custom motorcycle shop, then a bar, then some kind of consulting thing I never fully understood. Each one collapsed under poor planning and poor execution. He'd borrowed money from me twice, just until the revenue picks up, and I'd given it without hesitation. That's what you did for people you loved. You supported them. He never paid me back. His friend group changed. More bar regulars, fewer of the people I'd met when we started dating. They had opinions about the military, usually delivered after several beers. Desk jockeys was a term I heard more than once. They had no idea what I did, but they were certain it wasn't real work. Ryan never corrected them. I remember one night in particular. We were at a sports bar in Norfolk, the kind with too many TVs and not enough ventilation. Ryan was holding court, telling some story I'd heard 3 times before, and his friend Mark said something about real soldiers. He meant combat infantry, boots on the ground. I didn't correct him either. I'd learned that explaining naval aviation operations to civilians was like explaining calculus to someone who decided math was stupid. But Ryan looked at me when Mark said it. Just for a second. And I saw something in his face I'd been ignoring for months: contempt. I should have left then. Should have walked out of that bar and never looked back. But I'd spent 6 years building a relationship alongside my career, and I'd been trained not to quit when things got difficult. Perseverance was a virtue in the Navy. I thought it applied to everything. Commander Rowe became my mentor during my first month in the Joint Task Group. She was 05, sharp as a blade, and she had a way of cutting through nonsense that I admired. "You'll face people who don't understand what you do," she told me over coffee in the base commissary. "They'll minimize it because it makes them feel better about their own choices. Don't let them." I nodded, thinking of Ryan. And Mercer. She fixed me with a steady look. The people who truly matter will never need convincing. I was running search coordination operations by then. When aircraft went down or ships sent distress signals, my team organized the response. I worked with Coast Guard, Air Force, Allied navies, coordinating assets across hundreds of nautical miles, making decisions that meant life or death for people I'd never meet. It was the kind of work that didn't make headlines but kept people alive. Ryan never asked about it. He asked about my schedule, whether I'd be home for his birthday, if I could skip the next deployment. He asked if I really needed to work late so often, if the Navy owned me, if I'd ever thought about getting a normal job. He asked everything except what my work actually entailed. I tried explaining once. We were driving back from his mother's house, sunset turning the sky orange and purple over the Chesapeake. I told him about a rescue mission we'd coordinated the week before, how we'd found a fishing vessel taking on water, how the helicopter crew had pulled 6 people off the deck before it went under. "That's great," he said, eyes on the road. "You should put that on your resume." The crack in my chest widened. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly. He liked the idea of dating someone in the military. He liked mentioning it at parties, having my girlfriend the naval officer as a talking point. But he hated everything that came with it: the sacrifices, the commitment, the fact that I'd chosen something bigger than him. I was 34 years old, 04, on track for 05 if I stayed focused. I'd given 6 years to a man who wanted the trophy without the reality. And I was about to learn exactly how little he understood about either. The distance between us grew measured in small moments rather than miles. I'd come home from a 16-hour duty shift and find Ryan on the couch, beer in hand, watching whatever game was on. He'd glance up, ask how my day was, then turn back to the screen before I finished answering. I started keeping my uniform jacket in the car, changing into civilian clothes in the parking lot before walking into my own apartment. It felt easier than watching him look through me. His jokes got sharper. At his friend Danny's wedding, someone asked where we'd met. "Pensacola," I said. I was in flight school. She was learning to push papers. Ryan cut in, smiling like it was friendly. I was actually fixing the planes. The table laughed. I didn't. Later that night, in the hotel room, I asked him why he'd said it that way. He was taking off his tie, loosening his collar, and he shrugged. "It's just a joke, Ava. Don't be so sensitive." It wasn't a joke. It was disrespectful. "You know what's disrespectful?" He turned to face me, and something cold flickered in his expression. "You acting like you're better than everyone because you wear a uniform." I stared at him. 6 years together, and I'd never heard him say anything like that out loud. "I have never." "You don't have to say it. It's in everything you do." He sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair. "You walk into a room and expect people to what, salute? You're not special, Ava. You're just someone who followed orders for a paycheck." The words hit like a fist. I sat down in the chair by the window, hands folded in my lap, and I didn't say anything. I'd learned in the Navy that some battles aren't worth fighting in the moment. You document, you observe, you plan. But watching Ryan climb into bed and turn off his lamp, I felt something fundamental break between us. I stopped telling him about work after that. When I got assigned to coordinate a major training exercise involving 3 carrier groups, I mentioned it once and he said, "Sounds boring." When I spent 72 hours straight managing search operations for a downed civilian aircraft, when my team found the wreckage and helped recover 2 survivors, I came home exhausted and grateful, and he asked if I'd picked up groceries. Commander Rowe noticed. We were reviewing logistics reports in her office, late afternoon sun coming through the blinds, and she closed the folder she'd been reading. "You all right, Mercer?" "Yes, ma'am." That wasn't a professional question. That was a personal one. I looked at her, this woman who'd made 05 by 38, who ran operations across 3 time zones and never seemed rattled. "How do you balance it?" I asked. "The work and everything else?" "I don't." She leaned back in her chair. "I prioritized what mattered." Some people understood. Some didn't. The ones who didn't aren't in my life anymore. That simple. That hard. She reopened the folder. But worth it. I started pulling away from Ryan after that conversation. Not dramatically, I didn't have the energy for drama. I just stopped bending my schedule to accommodate his. When he asked me to skip a training briefing for his birthday dinner, I said no. When he wanted me to take leave for his friend's bachelor party weekend, I explained I couldn't. When he complained I was never around, I pointed out I'd been working the same hours for 6 years. "You've changed," he said one night in March. We were in my apartment, the place I'd bought with my own money, and he was packing an overnight bag with sharp, angry movements. "You used to care about us. I used to think us meant something mutual." He stopped, looked at me. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I've covered your rent twice, loaned you $15,000 for businesses that failed, rearranged my life around your schedule for 6 years, and you can't be bothered to remember what I actually do for a living. That's not fair. You told someone last week I make coffee for real soldiers." His face went red. "That was a joke." "When is it funny, Ryan?" "When you say it at a wedding." "At a barbecue?" "To your friends who already think military women are a punchline." I kept my voice level, professional, the tone I used when dressing down junior officers. "I coordinate search and rescue operations across the Atlantic Fleet. I brief admirals. I make decisions that save lives. And you've decided that's worth less than fixing carburetors." "Oh, here we go. Saint Ava, saving the world. Get out." He blinked. "What?" "Get out of my apartment. We're done." He didn't move for a long moment, and I could see him calculating whether I meant it. Then he grabbed his bag and walked toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the knob. "You're going to regret this. When you're alone in your 40s with nothing but your precious rank, you'll regret it." "Maybe." I stood with my arms crossed, still in my working khakis, insignia on my collar. "But I won't regret wasting any more time on you." He left. I sat down on my couch in the sudden silence and waited to feel something. Relief came first, then exhaustion, then a strange kind of clarity. I'd been carrying him for years, and I hadn't even noticed the weight until I set it down. I called Commander Rowe the next morning. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for the advice." "You ended it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She paused. "Take the weekend." "That's in order. Go somewhere, clear your head, come back ready to work." I spent the weekend hiking in Shenandoah, alone with my thoughts and the mountains. By Monday, I was back at my desk at 0600 hours, reviewing flight schedules and feeling more myself than I had in months. I'd made Lieutenant Commander despite Ryan, not because of him. And I was going to make Commander the same way. But I didn't know then that Ryan wasn't finished. That his ego, bruised and bitter, would seek one final moment of validation. And I didn't know that moment would come in the worst possible place, in front of the worst possible audience. 3 weeks after we broke up, Ryan started showing up at Barley's, a bar 2 blocks from the main gate at Naval Station Norfolk. I heard about it from Lieutenant Morrison, one of my junior officers, who mentioned seeing him there with some loud guys on a Friday night. I should have paid attention to that detail. Should have wondered why he'd suddenly chosen a bar frequented by active duty personnel. But I was focused on work. We had a major exercise scheduled for May, coordinated operations involving carrier air wings, submarine groups, and allied naval forces. My team was responsible for the aviation logistics piece, which meant managing flight schedules, fuel allocations, maintenance rotations, and emergency protocols across 4 different time zones. I was spending 12-hour days in the operations center, reviewing reports and running simulations. Commander Rowe stopped by my desk one afternoon in mid-April. "You're up for promotion consideration," she said without preamble. "The board meets in July. Your packet looks strong." "Oh, 5. Commander. The rank most officers spent their whole careers reaching for, and I'd have a shot at it before 35. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me. You earned it." She glanced at my desk, covered in navigation charts and logistics spreadsheets. "But Mercer? Take a night off before you burn out. That's professional advice." So on a Friday in late April, I agreed to meet Lieutenant Morrison and a few others at Barley's for drinks. Nothing formal, just an hour or 2 of unwinding before the weekend duty shift started. I changed out of my uniform on base, pulled on jeans and a navy sweatshirt, and drove over around 1900 hours. The bar was crowded, thick with the kind of noise that comes from too many conversations happening at once. Morrison and her group had claimed a table near the back. I was making my way through the crowd when I heard a voice I recognized carrying over the din. "Yeah, she thinks she's hot shit now. Lieutenant Commander." Ryan drew out the rank mockingly. "Like that means something." I stopped. He was at the bar with 4 other men, all civilians from the look of them, beers in hand and faces flushed with alcohol and bravado. He hadn't seen me yet. "What does she even do?" one of his friends asked. Ryan laughed too loud. "Honestly? Probably makes coffee for the real soldiers. You know, the guys who actually deploy and see combat. She sits at a desk and sends emails." The group laughed. I felt my face go hot, but I stayed where I was. Years in the Navy had taught me discipline, how to control your reaction even when everything in you wanted to respond. I could have walked away. Should have walked away. But Morrison had heard it too. She'd gone rigid beside me, her jaw tight. "Sir, it's fine," I said quietly. "Let it go." I started to turn away, to do what I'd always done and rise above it. Then Ryan saw me. His eyes widened for just a second before his expression shifted into something uglier. He raised his voice deliberately. "Oh, hey, Ava." He waved me over like we were friends. "Come here, I was just telling these guys about you. About your military career." He made air quotes around the last 2 words. The bar wasn't silent, but enough people had noticed that a pocket of quiet spread around us. I walked over slowly, keeping my face neutral. "Ryan. This is her," he announced to his friends, gesturing at me with his beer. "This is Ava. She's in the military." "Well, she says she is." He grinned at his own joke. "I mean, technically she wears the uniform, but come on. What does she even do? Make coffee for the real soldiers." His friends laughed again, encouraged. One of them, a guy with a sunburn and a backwards cap, added, "I didn't think they let women do the real military stuff anyway." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the man sitting beside Ryan stood up. I'd noticed him earlier without really seeing him, older, maybe 60, in pressed khaki pants and a navy blue polo shirt. He'd been sitting quietly, nursing what looked like a club soda, not engaging with Ryan's group. "Son," he said, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Stand up." Ryan blinked, confused. "What?" I said stand up. It wasn't a request. Something in his tone made Ryan obey. He pushed back from the bar, still holding his beer, trying to maintain his smirk, but looking uncertain now. The older man turned slightly, and that's when I saw the Naval Academy ring on his right hand, the way he carried himself with absolute authority even in civilian clothes. "Lieutenant Commander Mercer," he said, and his voice was formal now, recognizable. "Didn't expect to see you off base." My stomach dropped. I knew that voice. Rear Admiral Samuel Holt, my commanding officer from my first carrier deployment, now serving at Fleet Forces Command. He'd been my ultimate boss when I was a junior lieutenant, and he'd been present at my O4 promotion ceremony last year. I snapped to attention instinctively. Admiral Holt, sir. At ease. He looked at Ryan, who'd gone pale. This woman isn't just in the military, son. She's one of the finest aviation operations officers in the Atlantic Fleet. That search coordination operation out of Helmand last year, the one that recovered 6 sailors from a burning vessel? Commander Mercer ran that. 16 hours straight, coordinating assets from 3 different services, making decisions under pressure that saved lives. The bar had gone completely silent now. Everyone was watching. She doesn't make coffee, Holt continued, his voice cold and precise. She makes decisions that people like me trust implicitly. And while you're sitting here drinking beer and mocking her service, she's been doing the work that keeps this country safe. Ryan looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His friends had backed away slightly, distancing themselves. One of the bartenders, clearly former military from his posture, had crossed his arms and was watching with an expression of grim satisfaction. Holt turned back to me. Good work on the May exercise planning, Commander. I reviewed your logistics brief yesterday. Solid work. Thank you, sir. He nodded once, then looked at Ryan again. You should choose your words more carefully, especially in a Navy town. Then he sat back down, picked up his club soda, and returned to his quiet corner as if nothing had happened. I stood there for 3 seconds, maintaining my composure, then turned and walked out of the bar. Morrison followed, along with the rest of my group. Behind us, I heard the murmur of conversation starting up again, sharp and judgmental. I didn't look back. Outside, in the parking lot under the streetlights, Morrison was the first to speak. Sir, that was mortifying, I finished. I was going to say perfect. She grinned. Did you see his face? I had. I'd seen Ryan's expression collapse, seen the recognition hit him that he'd been mocking a commander in front of a rear admiral. And part of me, the part one wasn't proud of, had felt a vicious satisfaction. But mostly I just felt tired. I didn't go back into the bar. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly until my heart rate settled. Morrison texted me twice asking if I was okay. I replied that I was fine, that I'd see her Monday, that she should enjoy her evening. Then I drove home through streets I'd known my whole life, past the shipyard where my father had worked, past the hospital where my mother had spent 30 years of night shifts. When I got to my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on my couch in the dark and let myself feel it, not the anger, which would have been easier, but the hurt. Ryan had known what I did. He'd listened to me talk about my work for 6 years. He'd seen me come home exhausted from critical operations, had watched me prep for briefings, had been there when I got promoted. He'd known, and he'd chosen to minimize it anyway. That was the part that cut deepest. My phone rang at 2200 hours. Ryan's number. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 2230. Again at 2300. I turned my phone off and went to bed. The next morning I woke to 17 missed calls and a dozen text messages, all from Ryan. I deleted them without reading and went for a run on base, 6 miles in the cool dawn air, trying to outpace the embarrassment that clung to me like humidity. Commander Rowe called me into her office Monday morning. I heard about Friday night. Of course she had. The Navy ran on gossip as much as it ran on fuel. Yes, ma'am. How are you handling it? I sat across from her desk, hands folded in my lap, and chose honesty. I'm angry. Not at what happened. Admiral Holt didn't do anything wrong. I'm angry that it happened at all. That someone I spent 6 years with thought so little of what I do that he'd mock it publicly. That's on him, not you. I know that intellectually. I paused. But it doesn't feel like it. Rowe leaned forward, elbows on her desk. When I was a lieutenant, my ex-husband told me I was wasting my potential playing dress-up. Said I should quit and focus on having kids. This was a man who'd married me knowing full well what I wanted to do with my life. She smiled without humor. Some people can't handle being with someone who has a mission bigger than their ego. That's not your failure. That's their limitation. What did you do? Divorced him and made commander 2 years later. She pulled up a file on her computer. Which brings me to the other reason you're here. Your promotion packet is being submitted this week. I wanted you to know that Admiral Holt added a personal recommendation letter. Whatever else happened Friday night, You made an impression. I felt something shift in my chest, some of the weight lifting. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. Oh, 5 board is competitive. But you've got as good a shot as anyone. She closed the laptop. Now get out of here and go brief the Air Wing commanders. They're waiting in conference room C. I spent the rest of Monday buried in work, which was exactly what I needed. By Tuesday, the story had made the rounds on base. Apparently, several people from Barley's were active duty or dependents, and the tale of the civilian who'd mocked a commander in front of a rear admiral had taken on legendary proportions. I heard 3 different versions in the commissary at lunch, none of them entirely accurate. Lieutenant Morrison found me Wednesday afternoon. Sir, I wanted to apologize. For what? For suggesting Barley's. If I'd known he'd be there, you couldn't have known. And I'm glad it happened. I was surprised to realize I meant it. Better to know what he really thought than to keep wondering. She nodded, but she still looked concerned. He's been calling around, trying to find people who'll listen to his side of things. My friend Sarah saw him at Harbor Market yesterday, and he tried to explain it was all a misunderstanding. It wasn't. That's what Sarah told him. Morrison grinned. She's a hospital corpsman. She mentioned that she'd helped coordinate medical supplies for that Hellmanned rescue operation you ran. Said anyone who thinks you make coffee is either stupid or willfully ignorant. I laughed to spite myself. Remind me to thank her. But the truth was, I didn't want to think about Ryan anymore. I wanted to move forward, to focus on the work that actually mattered. When he showed up at my apartment Thursday evening, I watched him through the peephole for 30 seconds before opening the door. He looked awful, unshaven, eyes red-rimmed, clothes wrinkled. Ava, please. Can we talk? No. I was drunk. I didn't mean any of it. You meant all of it. You just didn't expect consequences. I kept my hand on the door, ready to close it. You spent 6 years resenting what I do because it took attention away from you. That's fine. You're entitled to your feelings. But you don't get to disrespect my service and then pretend it was a joke when it blows up in your face. I'm sorry. I believe you're sorry you got embarrassed. I don't believe you're sorry for what you said. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. Now it just looked desperate. What do you want me to say? Nothing. I want you to leave. Ava, I'm not your girlfriend anymore, Ryan. I'm not your second chance. I'm a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy, and I have better things to do than teach you basic respect. I started to close the door, then paused. And for the record, I never asked you to salute. I just asked you to see me. I closed the door before he could respond. I heard him stand there for a minute, maybe hoping I'd change my mind. Then his footsteps faded down the hallway, and I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. Commander Rowe called me that weekend. Random question. You have plans next Friday? Just duty rotation prep. Why? Admiral Holt is hosting a reception for the senior staff. Bring your own +1 sort of thing, but he specifically asked if you'd be attending. I think he feels bad about Friday night. He shouldn't. He didn't do anything wrong. I'll tell him you're coming. She paused. Wear your service dress blues. Let them see what a real officer looks like. I wore my service dress blues to the reception, ribbons and insignia polished, shoes shined to a mirror finish. Admiral Holt found me within 20 minutes, club soda in hand just like at the bar. Commander Mercer. Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, sir. He studied me for a moment. I hope I didn't overstep last Friday. That wasn't my intention. You didn't, sir. You told the truth. That's never overstepping. Still. He smiled slightly. I've known men like that. They can't handle being with someone who outshines them. It's a character flaw, not yours. Yes, sir. Your promotion packet looks strong. I meant what I said in my recommendation letter. You're one of the finest officers I've served with. The promotion board met in July, 3 months after the incident at Barley's. I spent those months doing exactly what I'd always done, working. The May exercise went off without a major hitch, coordinating 6 carrier air wings across 4 operational theaters. When a technical failure grounded half the F-18 squadron at the last minute, my team rerouted assets and adjusted the schedule in under 3 hours. Commander Rowe told me later that Admiral Holt had watched the whole thing from the command center and called it textbook crisis management. I tried not to think about the promotion board. Tried not to calculate my chances or wonder what the other candidates' packets looked like. But late at night, alone in my apartment, I'd lie awake and run through every decision I'd made over the past 3 years, looking for mistakes. Lieutenant Morrison noticed. "Sir, you're going to make yourself crazy." "I'm fine. You've reorganized the supply inventory twice this week. You reorganized it last month." She leaned against my desk. "The board already met. Your fate's sealed. Worrying won't change it." She was right, of course. The board results wouldn't be released until September, and in the meantime I had work to do. We were implementing a new logistics tracking system, updating protocols for cold weather operations, and training 3 new junior officers who just transferred in from Pensacola. I threw myself into it, grateful for the distraction. Ryan kept trying to contact me. Text messages I deleted unread. Phone calls I blocked. Once he sent flowers to my office, 24 roses with a card that read, "I'm sorry. Please call me." Lieutenant Morrison intercepted them and asked if she should throw them out. "Give them to the hospital," I said. "Someone there might as well enjoy them." He's not giving up easy. He's not fighting for me. He's fighting for his ego. I signed off on a maintenance report without looking up. There's a difference. In August, I ran into one of Ryan's friends at the grocery store. Danny, the one whose wedding I'd attended. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, like he wanted to pretend he hadn't. I took mercy on him and nodded politely, planning to move on. But he stopped me. "Hey, Ava. Can I talk to you for a second?" I checked my watch. "I have 5 minutes. Look, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. About what happened at the bar. I was there that night and I should have shut Ryan down. He was way out of line." "Yes, he was." Danny shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "He's been pretty messed up since you guys broke up. Lost his lease on the shop space, moved back in with his mom. He's been drinking a lot." I felt a flicker of sympathy, then remembered him laughing at Ryan's jokes about my service. "That's unfortunate, but it's not my problem." "I know. I just thought you should know he's sorry. He's sorry he got caught. There's a difference." I pushed my cart forward. "If he's really sorry, he can work on being a better person. That has nothing to do with me." Danny nodded slowly. "Yeah, fair enough." He paused. "For what it's worth, I looked you up after that night. Read about some of the operations you've run. That rescue mission out of Helmand? That was incredible. It was my job. Still." He met my eyes. Ryan was wrong. About all of it. I appreciated the apology more than I wanted to admit, but I didn't let it show. "Tell your friends to stop calling me." "I will." He meant it. The calls and messages stopped after that, and I could finally stop tensing every time my phone buzzed. September came with hurricane season protocols and emergency preparedness drills. I spent a week on a carrier offshore, observing operations and consulting on a new maintenance rotation system. When I got back to Norfolk, Commander Rowe was waiting at my desk with an envelope. "It's early," I said, looking at the official seal. "They expedited it." She handed it to me. "I already know what it says. Admiral Holt's office called an hour ago." My hands shook as I opened it. The language was formal, bureaucratic, but the meaning was clear. I'd been selected for promotion to Commander 05, effective October 1st. Pending final approval, which was basically a formality, I'd pin on my new rank in 6 weeks. "Congratulations, Commander." Rose smiled. "You earned it." I sat down slowly, reading it twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. "Oh, 5 at 34. Some officers spent 20 years reaching this rank. Some never made it at all. And I'd done it despite everything, despite the deployments, the skepticism, the ex-boyfriend who'd tried to convince me I was worth less than I knew." "Thank you, ma'am." "Stop calling me ma'am. We're the same rank now." She paused. "Well, in 6 weeks." The promotion ceremony was small and professional, held in the base chapel on a crisp October morning. Admiral Holt presided, Commander Rowe stood beside me, and about 30 officers filled the pews. My parents drove up from Norfolk, my mother crying quietly through the whole thing. When Holt pinned the new insignia on my collar, I felt the weight of it, not the medal, but the responsibility. "Commander Ava Mercer," he said formally. "Congratulations on your promotion. Continue to serve with the distinction you've shown thus far." "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." Afterward, there was cake in the officers' club and handshakes and congratulations. My mother hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. My father, never good with words, just squeezed my shoulder and said, "Proud of you, honey." Lieutenant Morrison showed up with the junior officers I'd been training. "We wanted to be here, sir." "Commander," she corrected herself, grinning. "Takes some getting used to." For me too. That night, alone in my apartment with my new rank insignia on my dresser, I let myself think about Ryan. Not with anger anymore, just with distance. He'd wanted me to be smaller so he could feel bigger. And when I refused to shrink, he'd tried to cut me down. But he'd failed and I'd risen anyway. I didn't celebrate out of spite. I celebrated because I'd earned it. 2 weeks later, I got a letter. Handwritten, my name and address in unfamiliar script. No return address. I almost threw it away without opening it, but something made me pause. Inside, a single page, I unfolded it carefully. Ryan's handwriting, less steady than usual. "Ava, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve your time or your forgiveness. But I need to say this, even if you never respond. I was wrong. Not just at the bar, about everything. I spent 6 years resenting your success because I was failing at everything I tried. You were rising and I was falling, and instead of being proud of you, I tried to drag you down to where I was. That's not love. That's cowardice. I heard you made commander. I'm not surprised. You were always going to make it, with or without me. Probably better without me. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I couldn't see then. You weren't choosing the Navy over me. You were choosing yourself. And that was the right choice. I hope wherever you are, you're happy. You deserve it." Ryan, I read it twice, then put it in my desk drawer. Not in the trash, but not anywhere I'd see it regularly either. It was an apology, and maybe even a genuine one. But it didn't change anything. Some lessons people learn too late to matter. Commander Rowe took me to lunch the next day, a tradition she maintained with newly promoted officers. We sat at a small cafe off base, away from uniforms and ranks and protocols. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Heavy. Good heavy, but heavy." "That's accurate." She sipped her coffee. "You know what comes next, right? More responsibility. Larger commands. And more people who'll underestimate you because of your age, your gender, your face." She set down her cup. "I'm not trying to discourage you. I'm preparing you. Oh, 5 is where the real politics start. Where people start seeing you as competition instead of a colleague." "Yes, ma'am." "Stop that." She smiled. "We're peers now. Call me Sarah when we're off base." It felt wrong after years of hierarchy, but I tried it. "Sarah." "Better." She leaned back. "You're going to do well, Ava. But you need to start building your network now. Mentors, sponsors, allies. People who'll fight for you when you're not in the room. You've done that for me. And I'll keep doing it. But you need more than one person. That's how you make 06. She paused. "That's how you outlast the people who think you don't belong." I thought about that conversation for weeks. Started attending more professional conferences, introducing myself to senior officers outside my immediate chain of command, volunteering for cross-service working groups. It was exhausting in a different way than operations work, all politics and careful words and reading subtle cues. But it was necessary. In December, I was assigned to mentor 3 newly commissioned ensigns, all women, all looking at me like I had answers I didn't actually possess. One of them, Ensign Patricia Chin, asked me during our first meeting how I'd made commander so young. "I worked hard," I said. "And I got lucky with good mentors." "That's it?" "No." I thought about how to phrase it. I also stopped letting other people's opinions of me matter more than my own opinion of myself. That helped. She nodded slowly. "Did people doubt you?" "Because you're a woman." "Some did. Some still do." I pulled up her training schedule on my computer. But you know what I learned? The people who doubt you aren't the ones who matter. The people who matter evaluate you based on your work, not their assumptions. What about the ones who don't? Who matter but still doubt you? I met her eyes. You prove them wrong by succeeding anyway. Not to change their minds, you can't control that. You do it because you refuse to let their limitations become yours. She smiled a little. Is that from a leadership manual? No, that's from experience. I thought about Ryan when I said it. About Admiral Holt standing up in that bar. About Commander Rowe telling me to prioritize what mattered. About every moment in the past year that had taught me who I was beneath the rank and the uniform. By Christmas, I'd settled into my new role. Larger staff, more complex operations, briefings with officers who outranked me and expected competence without question. I delivered it. When a logistics failure threatened to ground an entire carrier air wing during a critical deployment, I spent 48 hours straight rebuilding the supply chain and found a solution that impressed even the skeptics. Admiral Holt called me into his office afterward. Commander Mercer, I reviewed your handling of the logistics crisis. Yes, sir. That was senior officer level thinking. The kind of problem solving we need at O6. He folded his hands on his desk. I'm putting you on the short list for a Pentagon liaison position next year. It's not a command role, but it's high visibility work. Good for your career. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Pentagon's a political minefield. You'll need thick skin. He smiled slightly. But I think you've already proven you have that. I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, genuine pride. Not the defensive kind that comes from proving someone wrong, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing you've done the work. That night, I pulled out Ryan's letter and read it again. Then I wrote a single sentence on the back: some people grow. Some people don't. Either way, I kept growing. I put it back in the drawer. Maybe someday I'd throw it away. Maybe I'd keep it as a reminder. Either way, it didn't define me anymore. I was Commander Ava Mercer, 05, United States Navy. And I'd earned every step of the climb. The Pentagon liaison position materialized in March, 6 months after my promotion to 05. It meant a temporary assignment to Washington, working in the Joint Staff's Logistics Directorate, coordinating between Navy operations and the other services. High profile, high pressure, and exactly the kind of role that could make or break a career. Commander Rowe, Sarah, I was learning to call her in private, took me to dinner the week before I left Norfolk. You ready for this? I think so. Wrong answer. She cut into her steak with precision. You need to know you're ready. The Pentagon isn't like fleet operations. It's briefings and bureaucracy and officers who think their PowerPoint skills make them strategists. You're going to want to scream. Daily. Noted. But here's the opportunity. You'll be working across service lines, building relationships with Army and Air Force and Marines. That's rare for someone at 05. Use it. I did. The Pentagon was exactly as frustrating as she'd warned: endless meetings, turf wars between services, decisions that took weeks when they should have taken hours. But I learned to navigate it. Learned who the real decision-makers were versus who just had fancy titles. Learned how to brief generals without making them feel like you were talking down to them. Learned which battles mattered and which ones to let go. I met Colonel Marcus Webb from the Air Force during a joint logistics planning session. He was 06, smart, and refreshingly direct. When I presented a proposal for streamlining inter-service supply chains, he was the only one who asked substantive questions instead of political ones. Commander Mercer, this would require significant systems integration. Have you run the cost analysis? Yes, sir. It's in Appendix C. I pulled it up on the screen. Initial investment of $4.2 million, but we'd see returns within 18 months through reduced redundancy. And the Air Force Logistics Command has agreed to this? Not yet, sir. That's why I'm briefing this group. I need buy-in from all services before I can move it up the chain. He smiled. Honest. I appreciate that. He turned to the room. I think this has merit. Let's give Commander Mercer the resources to develop it further. That was how you built allies. By doing good work and being straight with people. Colonel Webb and I ended up collaborating on 3 different initiatives over the next 6 months. He became a mentor of sorts, teaching me the Pentagon's unwritten rules. The brass care about 3 things, he told me over coffee in the commissary. Efficiency, optics, and not looking stupid in front of Congress. Hit all 3 and you're golden. What if those things contradict each other? Welcome to the Pentagon. I was in Washington when I heard about Ryan again, this time through an unexpected source. My mother called on a Sunday morning while I was reviewing briefing materials. Honey, I ran into Linda Cole at the grocery store yesterday. Linda was Ryan's mother. I hadn't thought about her in over a year. Okay. She wanted me to tell you that Ryan's doing better. He's working as a mechanic again, steady job, and he's been sober for 8 months. I set down my coffee. That's good. I'm glad he's getting his life together. She also said, and I told her she shouldn't ask this, but she did anyway. She said Ryan wanted to know if you'd be willing to talk to him. Just once. For closure. No. I told her you'd say that. I don't owe him closure, Mom. He made his choices. I'm glad he's doing better, but that doesn't obligate me to anything. I know, honey. I just promised I'd ask. She paused. Are you happy? Really happy. I looked around my small Pentagon office, awards on the wall, commendations from 3 different services, a photo of me shaking hands with the Secretary of the Navy. Yeah, Mom. I really am. Then that's all that matters. The Pentagon assignment was supposed to last a year, but it stretched to 18 months because of a major reorganization initiative I'd been tapped to lead. By the time I returned to Norfolk in September, I was being considered for a command position, executive officer of a logistics squadron, second in command of over 200 personnel. Sarah had been promoted to Captain 06 while I was away. We met for drinks my first week back, and she looked different somehow. More settled, more certain. You're going to get the XO position, she said. I've seen the recommendation letters. You're the top candidate. There are 3 other commanders with more time and grade, but none of them reorganized Pentagon logistics operations or built working relationships with senior officers across all 4 services. She raised her glass. You've outgrown Norfolk, Ava. In the best way. The XO position came through in November. I reported to Commander Paul Hendricks, the commanding officer, who laid out his expectations on my first day. I run a tight ship, Commander Mercer. I don't tolerate politics, incompetence, or excuses. You keep these sailors mission-ready and morale high, we'll get along fine. Yes, sir. I read your file. Pentagon made you soft. No, sir. Made me diplomatic. He smiled. Good. You'll need both here. I threw myself into the work. Morning musters at 0600 hours, personnel evaluations, training schedules, equipment maintenance oversight, family support programs. It was exhausting and exhilarating. For the first time, I wasn't just coordinating operations, I was leading people directly, seeing the impact of my decisions in real time. One of my sailors, Petty Officer 2nd Class Martinez, came to my office 3 months into my tenure. She was 26, sharp, and clearly nervous. Ma'am, can I ask you something personal? If it's appropriate. How do you handle people not taking you seriously? Because you're a woman. I gestured for her to sit. What happened? There's a chief, I won't say who keeps making comments. Nothing I can report, just little things. Asking if I'm sure I can handle heavy equipment, joking about women and tools, that kind of stuff. And you want to know if it gets better? Does it? I thought about Ryan, about the bar, about a dozen other moments over 15 years. Honestly, some people never change. But you get better at not letting it matter. And you surround yourself with people who respect competence over gender. That's not really encouraging, ma'am. No, it's not. I leaned forward. But here's what is, you're good at your job. I've seen your evaluations. You're in the top 10% of your rate. That speaks louder than any chief's opinion. Do the work, document everything, and build a reputation that can't be questioned. Like you did. Like I'm still doing. It doesn't end, Martinez. You just get better at fighting it. She nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest, ma'am. After she left, I sat in my office thinking about that conversation. Thinking about all the young women coming up behind me, facing the same skepticism I'd faced. I couldn't fix the whole system, but I could make sure they had what I'd had, mentors who told the truth and supported them anyway. The years between 36 and 40 passed in a blur of operations, deployments, and steady advancement. I made Captain 06 at 39, early for the rank but not unheard of anymore. The ceremony was larger this time, held on the deck of a carrier with Admiral Holt presiding again. He was closer to retirement now, gray at the temples, but still sharp. "Captain Mercer," he said as he pinned the new insignia on my collar. "You've exceeded every expectation. Don't stop now." "No intention of stopping, sir." My parents couldn't make it this time. My father's health was declining, but Sarah was there, along with Colonel Webb, who'd flown in from Colorado, where he was now stationed. Martinez, now a first-class petty officer, stood in formation with the rest of my squadron, grinning like she'd been promoted herself. Six came with a command position, commanding officer of a naval aviation logistics squadron, responsible for 400 personnel and operations supporting 3 carrier groups. The weight of it was real, not just the rank, but the knowledge that my decisions affected hundreds of lives, thousands of missions, potentially millions of dollars in equipment and operations. I moved into the CO's office on a Monday morning in January, boxes of my personal effects stacked in the corner. My predecessor, Captain Richardson, spent 3 hours walking me through ongoing operations, personnel issues, and the political landscape of the base command structure. "You've got a good crew," he said. "But watch Commander Paulson in supply. He's competent but territorial. And Captain Morris over in air operations still thinks women shouldn't be in command positions. He won't say it outright, but you'll feel it." "Noted. You'll do fine, Mercer. You've got the respect of everyone who matters." But respect was something you maintained, not something you achieved once and kept forever. I learned that in my first month. A supply chain failure during a critical deployment preparation threatened to delay carrier launch by 3 days. I spent 72 hours straight identifying bottlenecks, reallocating resources, and personally calling in favors from contacts across 3 time zones. We launched on time. Captain Morris stopped me in the corridor afterward. "Impressive work, Captain Mercer. Didn't think you'd pull it off." "Why not, sir?" He blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Just complicated situation. Lots of moving parts." "Yes, sir. That's why I'm here." I walked away before he could respond. Sarah laughed when I told her about it later. "You're learning. Don't argue, don't defend. Just do the job and let the results speak." "Is that what you did?" "Every damn day." She was Commodore now, in charge of multiple squadrons, on track for Rear Admiral if the Navy didn't mess it up. And you know what? It worked. I'm still here, and the people who doubted me aren't. I started mentoring more junior officers, both men and women, but especially the women who reminded me of myself at 25. Lieutenant Sandra Kim came to my office regularly, asking questions about career progression and leadership. She was smart, driven, and constantly second-guessing herself. "You don't need permission to be competent," I told her during one session. "That's the trap. Waiting for someone to validate you before you trust yourself." "But what if I make a mistake?" "You will make mistakes. Everyone does. The question is whether you learn from them or let them paralyze you." She processed that. "How do you handle the pressure?" "I remember why I'm here. It's not about proving anything to anyone anymore. It's about the mission and the people under my command." When did that shift happen? I thought about it. Somewhere between commander and captain. When I stopped caring what my ex-boyfriend thought and started focusing on what I knew I could do. She tilted her head. "You had an ex who didn't support your career?" "That's a generous way to put it. He actively undermined it." I smiled without humor. Best thing that ever happened to me was him showing his true colors early enough that I could move on. "Did you ever hear from him again?" "Once. Letter apologizing." I acknowledged it and moved forward. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You can accept someone's apology without letting them back into your life. Lieutenant Kim became one of my success stories. She made lieutenant commander at 32, fast-tracked like I'd been, and called me the day she got the news. "Captain Mercer, I wanted you to hear it from me." I made 04. "Outstanding, Kim. I'm proud of you. I wouldn't have had the confidence without your mentorship. You had the competence. I just helped you see it." Those were the moments that mattered more than any promotion. Watching the next generation rise, knowing I'd played even a small part in their success. I was 41 when my father died. Heart attack, sudden, the kind of loss that rearranges your understanding of time. I took emergency leave and flew home to Norfolk, spent a week helping my mother with arrangements and sitting through a funeral that felt both too long and too short. The night after we buried him, I sat on my mother's porch with a glass of wine, watching the ships in the harbor. She joined me with her own glass. "He was so proud of you," she said quietly. "You know that, right?" "I do. When you made captain, he showed everyone. The neighbors, people at the grocery store, the nurses at the clinic. My daughter, the Navy captain." He must have said it 100 times. I felt tears I'd been holding back for 3 days finally break through. "I wish I'd been home more." "He never wished that. He knew what you were doing mattered." She squeezed my hand. "He used to say, 'Our girl's out there keeping people safe.' That's where she needs to be." I should have called more. "Ava." She turned to face me. "You gave him exactly what he wanted, a daughter who lived her life fully, who didn't shrink herself for anyone. That was his proudest achievement. Not that you joined the Navy, but that you became yourself without apologizing for it." I stayed with her for 2 weeks, handling paperwork and making sure she had support systems in place. When I returned to base, I felt older somehow. More aware of how quickly time moved, how the years you thought you had could disappear in a moment. Admiral Holt called me into his office my second day back. "My condolences, Captain Mercer. I heard about your father." "Thank you, sir. Take the time you need." "I'd rather work, sir." That's what he would have wanted. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I understand that impulse. Just don't burn yourself out. We need you for the long haul." The long haul. I was 4106, with potentially another decade or more ahead of me. Maybe Rear Admiral someday, if the boards favored me. Maybe not. Either way, I'd already exceeded what that 22-year-old ensign had dreamed possible. I ran into one of Ryan's old friends at a conference in Virginia Beach that summer. Tom, I think his name was. He recognized me first. "Captain Mercer?" I turned. "Yes, Tom Bradley. We met years ago, through Ryan Cole." "I remember." He looked uncomfortable. "I just wanted to say, I heard about your father. I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. And I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened back then. At the bar and everything." He shifted his weight. "We were idiots. You didn't deserve that." "No, I didn't. Ryan talks about you sometimes. About how he screwed up the best thing in his life." He paused. "He's doing okay now. Married, kid on the way. But he knows what he lost." "I'm glad he's doing well." "I genuinely am. I meant it. But that part of my life is over. Has been for a long time." "I know. I just thought you should know he figured it out. Eventually. Some people do." I checked my watch. "I need to get to my next session. Take care, Tom." I walked away feeling nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not curiosity. Just neutral acknowledgement that someone I used to know had grown up. It didn't change anything about my life. That night, I had dinner with Sarah Commodore Mackenzie now, her married name, though she'd divorced years ago and kept it out of convenience. We talked about the conference, about Navy politics, about her potential promotion to Rear Admiral. "You'll get there too," she said. "Another 4 or 5 years, you'll be wearing stars." "Maybe." "Definitely." She raised her glass. "To outlasting everyone who said we couldn't." I raised mine. "To proving them irrelevant." We drank to that, 2 women who'd refused to be small, who'd climbed despite the weight pulling against us. And I thought about Admiral Holt standing up in that bar 7 years ago, speaking truth when it mattered. Respect wasn't given at a bar. It was earned in years of steady work, in decisions made correctly under pressure, in mentoring the next generation, in refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier. And I'd earned every bit of mine. By my mid-40s, I'd stopped counting the years and started measuring time in operations, in personnel trained, in crises managed. 3 carrier deployments coordinated flawlessly. A logistics system overhaul that became the Navy standard. 14 junior officers mentored to promotion. These were the markers that mattered now. I was 45 when Commodore Mackenzie, Sarah, called me with news. I got the star. Rear Admiral Mackenzie. I grinned into the phone. About damn time. They're giving me a task force. And Ava? I want you as my chief of staff. That stopped me. Chief of Staff to a flag officer was a captain's dream assignment: high visibility, direct access to strategic decision-making, a clear path to your own promotion to Admiral. But it also meant leaving my command, the squadron I'd built over 6 years. That's a significant offer. It's also the right career move. You've proven yourself at the tactical level. Time to move up to strategy. Can I think about it? You have 48 hours. Then I need an answer. I spent those 2 days weighing options, talking to mentors, analyzing pros and cons. In the end, it came down to a simple question: what did I want the next phase of my career to look like? Another few years commanding squadrons, or stepping into the strategic level where decisions affected entire fleets? I called her at hour 47. I'm in. Outstanding. Report to Norfolk Naval Station in 30 days. We've got work to do. The transition was bittersweet. My change of command ceremony felt like leaving family. I'd served with these sailors through deployments and emergencies, births and deaths, triumphs and failures. They'd become more than subordinates. They were people I'd invested in, people whose lives I'd shaped. Martinez, now a chief petty officer, presented me with a plaque at the reception. For the captain who taught us that competence beats skepticism every time. I hugged her, something I rarely did, and whispered, "Keep pushing forward. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do." Never, ma'am. Working for Rear Admiral Mackenzie was different from commanding. Instead of managing daily operations, I was coordinating between squadrons, planning strategic initiatives, briefing senior officers up to and including the Chief of Naval Operations. The pace was relentless, the stakes enormous, the visibility intense. "How's it feel being this close to the flag suite?" Sarah asked during one late-night planning session. "Exhausting." "Good. That means you're doing it right." She reviewed a logistics proposal I'd drafted. "This is solid work, Ava. Keep this up, and you'll have your own flag in 2 years." "That's assuming the board selects me." "The board will select you. Trust me." But I didn't let myself believe it. I'd seen too many qualified officers get passed over for politics or bad timing or simple bad luck. I focused on the work, on executing each mission with precision, on building the reputation that would make me undeniable. In my second year as Chief of Staff, we coordinated a major humanitarian relief operation after a devastating hurricane hit the Caribbean. 12 ships, 40 aircraft, 2,000 personnel, all coordinating with FEMA and multiple allied nations. I spent 6 weeks running operations from a command center, sleeping 4 hours a night, living on coffee and adrenaline. When it was over, when the last supplies had been delivered and the last evacuees brought to safety, the Secretary of the Navy personally called to commend our work. "Captain Mercer, your coordination was exemplary. This operation saved lives." The President wanted me to convey his gratitude. "Thank you, sir. It was a team effort. It was your leadership that made the team effective." That commendation went in my promotion packet. So did letters from 3 allied admirals, from the FEMA director, from the ambassador to the affected nation. Sarah reviewed it all before submission. "If you don't make flag with this record, the system's broken. Let's not jinx it." The flag selection board met in April. Results would come in July. 3 months of waiting, trying not to think about it, failing completely. I threw myself into work, planning the next major exercise, updating strategic protocols, anything to keep my mind occupied. Lieutenant Colonel Webb, he'd made full colonel now, called from his Pentagon posting. "Mercer, I heard you're up for flag. About time. We'll see what the board thinks." The board would be insane not to select you. "I've worked with dozens of OSIXS across all services. You're top tier." "I appreciate that, Marcus. I'm serious. And when you make Admiral, remember who your Air Force friends are. We could use your strategic mind on some joint operations planning." "I'll keep that in mind." July came with oppressive heat and humidity, the kind that made Norfolk feel like a steam bath. I was in a meeting when Sarah's aide found me. "Ma'am, Admiral Mackenzie needs to see you." Immediately. My stomach dropped. This was it. Either I'd made the list or I hadn't. I walked to her office on autopilot, knocked once, entered. Sarah was standing behind her desk, smiling. "Congratulations, Rear Admiral Mercer." The room tilted. "I made it." Top of the list. The board commented specifically on your humanitarian operation leadership and your strategic planning capabilities. Your promotion ceremony is scheduled for September 15th. I sat down because my legs stopped working. Rear Admiral. 07. Flag Officer. The rank that 99% of officers never reached, the culmination of 24 years of work. I'd started as an ensign figuring out navigation systems, and now I was going to wear a star on my collar. Thank you, I managed. For everything. You earned it, Ava. Every bit of it. She came around the desk. Now the real work begins. Flag officers don't just execute, they set direction. You ready for that? Yes, ma'am. Good. Because I'm retiring in 18 months and someone needs to take over this task force. Might as well be you. The promotion ceremony was held aboard a destroyer, USS Michael Murphy, with full military honors. Admiral Holt came out of retirement to officiate. He was 70 now, silver-haired and walking with a slight limp, but his voice was still steady and strong. I've known Captain Mercer since she was a lieutenant, he said to the assembled crowd. Even then, I could see she had the qualities we need in flag officers: integrity, strategic thinking, and the courage to make hard decisions. Today we make official what many of us have known for years. She belongs among the Navy's leaders. My mother was there, sitting in the front row, crying quietly. Martinez had flown in from her new posting in Japan. Colonel Webb represented the Air Force. Lieutenant Kim, now a commander herself, stood with a group of junior officers I'd mentored over the years. When Admiral Holt pinned the star on my collar, I felt the weight of everything that had brought me here: the deployments, the doubts, the bar incident that had almost broken me, the years of proving myself again and again. But mostly I felt gratitude. For the mentors who'd believed in me. For the sailors who'd trusted my leadership. For my parents who'd taught me discipline without demanding it. Rear Admiral Ava Mercer, Holt said formally. Congratulations. Continue to serve with distinction. Yes, sir. Always. The reception afterward was larger than I'd expected. Officers from across the fleet, civilian officials, allied military attaches. I worked the room for 3 hours, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, until I finally found a quiet corner with a glass of water. Colonel Webb found me there. Hiding, Admiral? Catching my breath. You've earned a moment. He raised his own glass. I meant what I said on the phone. You're one of the finest officers I've served with, regardless of service branch. That means a lot, Marcus. And I wasn't joking about joint operations. The Air Force is developing a new rapid deployment concept. We need someone with your logistics and strategic background to help shape it. Interested? Absolutely. He grinned. Good. I'll send you the briefing materials next week. Welcome to the flag level, Admiral. It's a different world up here. He wasn't wrong. The jump from captain to rear admiral was exponential in terms of responsibility and visibility. I was no longer just executing missions, I was helping design them. No longer just managing personnel, I was shaping policy that affected thousands of sailors. Sarah pulled me aside near the end of the reception. How does it feel? Surreal. Wait until you chair your first flag-level planning session. Then it'll feel real. She smiled. You're going to do great things, Ava. Greater than you've already done. I'm just trying to serve well. That's why you'll succeed. That night, alone in my quarters, I looked at the star on my new uniform and thought about the journey. 24 years from ensign to rear admiral. From the girl who wanted something bigger than herself to the woman who'd achieved it. I thought about Ryan briefly, wondered if he'd heard. Decided it didn't matter. He was part of a past life, a lesson learned and moved beyond. The man I'd been with for 6 years was irrelevant to the admiral I'd become. I called my mother before bed. Hey, Mom. Admiral Mercer. She was crying again, happy tears this time. Your father would have been so proud. I wish he could have seen it. He knew, honey. He always knew you'd get here. After we hung up, I pulled out an old photograph, my father and me at my commissioning ceremony, both of us grinning, his hand on my shoulder. I'd been 22, terrified and excited, with no idea what lay ahead. We made it, Dad, I whispered to the photo. We made it. That's where I drew the line and kept it. If this hit home, like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs a reminder to stand up for themselves. Your turn. When were you publicly underestimated, and how did you respond? What's one boundary you set that changed a relationship for the better? Have you ever had someone defend you in the moment like that Admiral did? What's the most dismissive line you've heard about your work, and what would you say to it now? If you've served or supported someone who has, what do people still get wrong about your role? Drop your answers in the comments. Your story might help someone else find their voice.